Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind whispered through the ancient trees that surrounded Rabber's secluded cottage, carrying with it the scent of the approaching autumn. The old wizard sat in his favorite armchair, staring into the flickering flames of the hearth, his mind heavy with the weight of a lifetime's worth of knowledge. He had devoted decades to studying the prophecy, the one that had been etched into the stone tablets of history and yet had faded from memory like a forgotten dream. The prophecy spoke of 4 heroes who would rise to save the world, but the names of those heroes had been lost to time, leaving only shadows in the minds of those who still remembered. Rabber's hands, gnarled and weathered with age, rested on the arms of his chair, and he closed his eyes, feeling the chill of mortality creeping into his bones. He had always known that his time was running out, but it wasn't until recently that he had begun to suspect that he might be connected to the prophecy in ways he had never imagined. The thought both frightened and exhilarated him. Could it be that he was one of the prophesied heroes? And if so, what role was he meant to play? With a sigh, Rabber pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on his staff as he shuffled across the room to a large, dusty book that sat on a pedestal near the window. The book was ancient, its leather cover cracked and worn, and the pages within were filled with the cryptic symbols of a language long forgotten. Rabber had spent years deciphering those symbols, and he had come to understand that the prophecy was incomplete. Pieces of it had been erased or hidden, leaving gaps that even he could not fill, but Rabber knew that time was of the essence. If he was indeed connected to the prophecy, then he had a duty to uncover the truth before it was too late. He had sent out a summons, a magical call that would reach the ears of those who were meant to join him on this journey. They were young, talented, and full of potential, but they were also untested, uncertain of their place in the world. Rabber only hoped that they would heed his call. As he stared out the window at the setting sun, Rabber felt a familiar ache in his chest, a reminder of the years that had passed and the knowledge that he had yet to discover. He had spent his life searching for answers, but now, in the twilight of his years, he feared that the answers he sought might never be found. The following morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Rabber heard the sound of footsteps approaching his cottage. He smiled to himself, knowing that his summons had been answered. One by one, they arrived, each of them carrying the weight of their own expectations and fears. Lyra was the first to arrive, her footsteps light and sure as she stepped into the clearing. She was a young woman, barely in her 20s, with sharp green eyes and a bow slung across her back. Her long, auburn hair was tied back in a practical braid, and she wore the simple, sturdy clothes of a hunter. Rabber had heard tales of her skill with a bow, and he knew that she was as fierce as she was independent. Kellen arrived next, a scholar and scribe from a distant coastal city. He was tall and thin, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a pair of round spectacles perched on his nose. Kellen's curiosity had always driven him to seek out knowledge, and Rabber knew that his mind was a treasure trove of ancient lore. But there was also a restlessness in him, a need to prove himself that Rabber recognized all too well. Mira came shortly after, a healer from a mountain town far to the north. She was quiet and unassuming, with a gentle demeanor that belied the strength within her. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose knot, and she carried a satchel filled with herbs and potions, always ready to tend to the wounds of others. Rabber had heard whispers of her connection to the natural world, a gift that allowed her to heal even the most grievous of injuries. Jax was the last to arrive, his presence announced by the clinking of the armor he wore. He was a warrior from a desert kingdom, strong and imposing, with a stern expression that hid the pain of a mysterious past. His dark hair was cropped short, and a scar ran down the left side of his face, a testament to the battles he had fought and survived. Rabber knew that Jax carried a heavy burden, one that had shaped him into the man he was today. As the four young people gathered in the clearing, Rabber stepped out of his cottage to greet them. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the questions that lingered on their lips, but he also saw something else, a spark of hope, a desire to understand their purpose. "Thank you for coming," Rabber said, his voice raspy with age. "I know that you must have questions, and I will do my best to answer them. But first, let me tell you why I have called you here." The four exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Rabber could feel the tension in the air, and he knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. He led them into his cottage, where the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, and motioned for them to sit. "I have spent my life studying the ancient prophecies," Rabber began, his eyes fixed on the flames. "And I have come to believe that one of those prophecies may be connected to you, to all of us. It speaks of four heroes who will rise to save the world from a great calamity. But the names of those heroes have been lost to time, and the prophecy itself is incomplete." He paused, letting his words sink in. He could see the skepticism on their faces, but he also saw the curiosity, the desire to know more. "I believe," Rabber continued, "that we may be connected to this prophecy in ways that even I do not fully understand. That is why I have called you here, to uncover the truth, to find out what role we are meant to play." Lyra was the first to speak, her voice steady and clear. "But why us? What makes you think that we're connected to this prophecy?" Rabber met her gaze, his expression serious. "Because I have seen it in my visions. Each of you possesses a unique ability, a gift that sets you apart from others. And I believe that those gifts are the key to unlocking the prophecy." Kellen frowned, pushing his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. "You're saying that we're supposed to be these heroes? But we don't even know what we're up against." "That is why we must find the truth," Rabber replied. "The prophecy is incomplete, but I have found clues that may lead us to the answers we seek. Our journey will not be easy, and there will be dangers along the way. But I believe that together, we can uncover the truth." Myra's voice was soft, but there was a note of determination in it. "If there's a chance that we can prevent this calamity, then we have to try." Jax remained silent, his expression unreadable. Rabber knew that the warrior carried his own doubts, but he also knew that Jax's sense of duty would drive him to see this quest through. Rabber stood, his hands gripping the head of his staff. "We leave at first light. There is an ancient library hidden deep within the mountains, where I believe we will find the next piece of the puzzle. I suggest you all get some rest. Our journey will be long, and we must be prepared for whatever lies ahead." As the others rose to leave, Rabber caught Jax's eye. The warrior hesitated for a moment, then nodded, following the others out of the cottage. Rabber watched them go, a sense of foreboding settling over him. The prophecy was shrouded in darkness, and he feared that the truth they sought might be more dangerous than they could imagine. The journey to the mountains was fraught with peril. The terrain was treacherous, the paths winding and narrow, and the air grew thinner with each step they took. The group traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their quest pressing down on them like a heavy cloak. Lyra led the way, her keen eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. She moved with the grace and agility of a seasoned hunter, her bow always at the ready. Behind her, Kellen pored over a map, trying to make sense of the ancient symbols that marked their path. Mira walked beside him, her eyes drawn to the plants and herbs that grew along the way, her mind already cataloging their uses. Jax brought up the rear, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, ever vigilant for threats that might emerge from the shadows. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped, and the wind howled through the narrow passes, cutting through their clothing like a knife. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that their journey was only just beginning. After several days of arduous travel, they reached the entrance to the ancient library. It was hidden within a narrow crevice in the rock, almost invisible to the untrained eye. Rabber approached the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent years searching for this place, and now, standing before it, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something that had been buried for centuries. The entrance was sealed with a heavy stone door, its surface etched with the same cryptic symbols that adorned the prophecy book. Rabber traced his fingers over the symbols, his mind racing as he tried to decipher their meaning. With a deep breath, he began to chant, the ancient words flowing from his lips like a river. The symbols on the door began to glow, and with a low rumble, the stone door slowly slid open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Rabber lit a torch and led the way into the library, the others following close behind. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and their footsteps echoed eerily in the darkness. The walls were lined with shelves filled with ancient scrolls and manuscripts, their brittle pages crumbling at the edges. They searched the library for hours, sifting through the old texts, looking for any clue that might help them complete the prophecy. It was Kellen who finally found it, a manuscript hidden beneath a pile of rubble, its pages yellowed with age. He carefully unrolled the scroll, his eyes scanning the faded text. "This is it," Kellen whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "This manuscript is part of the same set of writings as the prophecy. It mentions the 4 heroes, but there's something else, something that was deliberately erased." Rabber took the scroll from Kellen, his eyes narrowing as he examined the text. "You're right. This part of the prophecy was hidden for a reason. It's as if someone didn't want us to know the truth." Mira leaned in, her brow furrowed. "But why? What could be so dangerous that it had to be erased from history?" Rabber shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know, but I fear we may be dealing with forces that are far more powerful than we imagined. The next clue points to a ruined temple in a distant land. We must go there if we are to uncover the truth." The journey to the temple took them through lands that had long been abandoned, their once thriving villages reduced to ruins. The landscape was desolate, the sky perpetually overcast, casting a pall over their spirits. As they neared the temple, they could feel the weight of the prophecy pressing down on them, a tangible force that seemed to grow stronger with each step they took. The temple was a crumbling relic, its stone walls covered in ivy and moss, the roof long since collapsed. Rabber could feel the ancient magic that still lingered in the air, a faint echo of the power that had once been wielded here. They entered the temple cautiously, their eyes darting to every shadow, every crevice where danger might lurk. At the center of the temple, they found an altar, its surface covered in dust and debris. As they approached, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their torches. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, they were blind, disoriented, their hearts pounding in their chests. Then, a soft glow began to emanate from the altar, illuminating the room with an eerie light. The glow grew stronger, revealing a figure standing before them, a guardian spirit, its form translucent and shimmering like a mirage. The spirit's eyes were empty voids, and its voice echoed in their minds, bypassing their ears entirely. "You seek the truth of the prophecy," the spirit intoned, its voice cold and emotionless. "But the truth you seek is not what you have been led to believe." Rabber stepped forward, his hand trembling as he gripped his staff. "What do you mean?" "We were told that the prophecy speaks of 4 heroes who will save the world." The spirit's gaze bore into him, and Rabber could feel its ancient wisdom, its knowledge of things long forgotten. "The prophecy has been misunderstood for centuries. It does not speak of salvation, but of destruction. The four heroes were not chosen to save the world, they were chosen to sacrifice themselves, to seal away a dark force that would otherwise consume all. The words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. The group was stunned, their minds reeling as they tried to process what they had just heard. Myra's voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. But the dark force, was it destroyed? No, the spirit replied, its voice tinged with sorrow. The force was not destroyed, only contained. And now, it seeks to break free once more. You are the ones who must decide its fate. Rabber's heart sank as the full weight of the prophecy's true meaning hit him. This was not a quest to save the world, it was a mission to prevent its annihilation, a task that would require the ultimate sacrifice. And yet, they were not the heroes the prophecy had foretold. They were merely the ones who had stumbled upon the truth, and now, they were faced with an impossible choice. The spirit's voice echoed through the chamber. The choice is yours. Seal the force away again, knowing that it may only be a temporary solution, or allow it to be unleashed and face the destruction it will bring. Jax's voice was a low growl, filled with anger and frustration. How can we make that choice? We're not the heroes of this prophecy, we're just people trying to survive. Rabber's voice was heavy with resignation. Perhaps that is why we were chosen. Not because we are heroes, but because we are the ones who are here, now, at this moment. The prophecy may have been forgotten, but its consequences are very real. Kellen's eyes were filled with determination. We can't let this force be unleashed. We have to try and seal it away again, even if it's only temporary. Lyra nodded, her expression grim. We may not be the heroes, but we're all that stands between this force and the world. We have to do what we can. Myra's voice was soft, but there was steel in it. I'm with you. We have to try. Rabber felt a surge of pride as he looked at the young people who had answered his call. They were not the heroes the prophecy had spoken of, but they were willing to stand against the darkness, to fight for a world that might never remember their names. He knew then that he had chosen well. They prepared themselves for the final battle, each drawing on their own strengths, their own abilities. Rabber, weakened as he was, knew that this would be his last fight, but he was determined to see it through. He had lived a long life, and now, at the end, he would give everything he had to protect the world he loved. The chamber grew colder as the dark force began to awaken, its presence a palpable weight on their minds. Rabber could feel it, a swirling mass of hatred and despair, a force that sought only to consume and destroy. He raised his staff, chanting the ancient words of power that he had learned so long ago. The others joined him, their voices rising in unison as they called upon the magic that flowed through them. The dark force surged against them, a tide of malevolent energy that threatened to overwhelm their defenses. Rabber could feel it clawing at the edges of his mind, trying to break through, but he held firm, pouring every ounce of his strength into the spell that would seal it away. Jax stepped forward, his sword gleaming in the eerie light. With a roar, he plunged the blade into the heart of the dark force, the impact sending shockwaves through the chamber. The force screamed in rage, lashing out with tendrils of darkness that wrapped around Jax, dragging him down. But he did not falter, his grip on the sword unyielding as he drove it deeper into the force's core. Lyra, her bow drawn, fired arrow after arrow into the swirling mass, each one glowing with a bright, purifying light. Kellen chanted words of protection, weaving a barrier around them that kept the dark force at bay. Mira, her hands glowing with healing energy, tended to the wounds that appeared on their bodies, her touch soothing the pain that threatened to break their concentration. Rabber could feel his strength waning, his vision beginning to blur. The dark force was powerful, far more powerful than he had anticipated, and he knew that they were running out of time. With a final, desperate surge, he poured the last of his magic into the spell, sealing the dark force away with a burst of blinding light. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight of the dark force lifting as it was contained once more. Rabber collapsed to the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. The others rushed to his side, their faces pale with fear. "Rabber," Lyra whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Are you all right?" Rabber smiled weakly, his vision fading. "I'm afraid my time has come. But you have done well. The force is contained, for now." Myra's voice was filled with desperation. "We can heal you, just hold on." But Rabber shook his head, his breathing shallow. "No, my time has passed. The world will always need heroes, whether they are remembered or not." With those final words, Rabber's eyes closed, and his body went still. The others knelt beside him, their hearts heavy with grief. They had won the battle, but the cost had been great. The dark force was contained, but the seal was imperfect, and they knew that one day it might break free again. As they left the temple, the weight of their quest still hung over them. They had uncovered the truth of the prophecy, but it had not brought them the salvation they had hoped for. Instead, they had only delayed the inevitable, buying the world a little more time. They returned to their homes, forever changed by the journey they had undertaken. Each carried the burden of what they had learned, the knowledge that the world was still in danger, and that the true heroes who could end the threat had yet to be found. But they also carried with them a sense of hope, a hope that when the time came, new heroes would rise to meet the challenge. The prophecy may have been forgotten, but the legacy of those who fought to understand it would live on, and in a distant land, a new prophecy book was being written, chronicling the deeds of Rabber and the 4 young heroes, ensuring that their story would not be forgotten, even if the true prophecy remained shrouded in mystery.